A son gets cut off by his own parents and left to rebuild his life alone. Years later, those same parents come back with a demand, not an apology, sell the home he fought to keep, so his sister's six-figure debt can disappear. When he refuses, it stops being family drama and turns into intimidation, forced entry and deliberate destruction meant to punish him into obedience. And only after the damage is done do they learn something that makes their threats useless. The house is no longer his to sacrifice, no longer his to be bullied over. Don't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. So when the people asking for the match are the ones who raised him, does he give them what they want to keep the peace, or draw a line so hard it finally has consequences, even if it means letting the law speak louder than blood? Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. And if you haven't yet subscribed so you don't miss what comes next on this journey, because some truths don't just surface, they explode. Now I'd like you to hear what he's been carrying in his heart. If you're still here with me after that phone call and those sirens, you deserve to know what really led to it. Because when my parents demanded I sell my house, it wasn't just about money. It was about a line in the sand I'd been drawing my whole adult life. And to understand why I would rather burn bridges than hand them that line, I have to take you back 5 years back to the version of me who still believed keeping the peace was a kind of love. I was 26, living in a studio in Kansas City that felt like it had been designed to punish optimism. The walls were thin enough to hear my neighbor's microwave beep through dinner. The window faced the parking lot, so every night the sodium lights washed my room in that dull orange glow like permanent sunset without any of the beauty. I had one small table that served as my desk, my kitchen counter, and my dining room. If I stretched my arms out, I could almost touch everything that mattered to me at the time: my laptop, my coffee mug, my calendar, and my savings tracker. Tech paid the bills, but it didn't make life gentle. My days were structured stand-ups, tickets, deadlines, the constant hum of solving problems that never stayed solved for long. Some nights I came home so late the lobby smelled like bleach and stale mail. Weekends weren't for relaxing. Weekends were for freelance projects, bug fixes for clients who wanted miracles on a discount, anything that meant another deposit into the one account I protected like it was a heartbeat. I lived like a monk with a mortgage dream. I took the bus instead of buying a car. I meal prepped plain food and called it being efficient so it didn't sound as sad as it sometimes felt. I said no to trips, no to concerts, no to spontaneous nights out, because none of those things built the life I wanted. Every time I felt tempted, I would open my spreadsheet and look at the number like it could talk me off a ledge. That file had a name that made me cringe if anyone ever saw it: exit plan. Because that's what it was. A map out of uncertainty. A map out of being one bad month away from panic. And if I'm being honest, a map out of my family's orbit. Not physically. Overland Park was only a short drive away, but emotionally. I'd spent years feeling like my value in that house was measured in usefulness, how much I could tolerate, how much I could give, how little I could ask for in return. The dream itself was simple: a craftsman in Kansas City, 3 bedrooms so I could turn one into a real home office and still have a spare room for guests, because part of me wanted to believe I'd eventually have people worth hosting. Hardwood floors, not carpet that held other people's stories. A kitchen that caught the morning light, the kind of place where coffee felt like a reward instead of a survival tool. I didn't want luxury, I wanted ownership. I wanted the quiet kind of pride you feel when you unlock your own front door and nobody can tell you what you owe them for being allowed inside. And still, every Saturday night I drove to my parents' place in Overland Park like I was clocking in for a shift I didn't get paid for. It was an unspoken agreement: show up, smile, eat, laugh at the right jokes, pretend the air wasn't always a little tense. My dad, Gordon, would sit in the same chair and complain about his back like it was his signature. My mom, Maureen, would hover between the kitchen and the dining room, fussing over plates and controlling the room with little looks and little sighs. They were the kind of parents who could sound warm in public and cold in private without ever raising their voices. My sister Kendra always arrived like she was stepping into a spotlight. She was a few years older, and she had this talent for making every conversation about her next big thing. She never walked in empty-handed, even if what she brought was just energy and noise. And her husband, Dustin Vale, was the kind of guy who talked like hard work was for other people. He didn't just chase opportunities, he chased shortcuts. He loved words like scalable and passive and game changer as if saying them out loud could make money appear. They spoke in futures. They rarely spoke in responsibilities. I told myself the Saturday dinners were for keeping the peace. That's what you say when you don't want to admit you're afraid of what happens if you stop. I was the steady one, the practical one, the one who didn't ask for much. And that role came with an invisible expectation if anything went wrong in the family, I'd be the buffer, the fixer, the quiet wallet with a pulse. So I built habits that made me feel safe. I saved receipts, I kept screenshots, I archived emails. I didn't even do it because I was paranoid. I did it because I'd learned that people who twist stories can't twist evidence as easily. After a couple nights when I noticed someone lingering outside my old building, I installed a doorbell camera as soon as I moved somewhere that allowed it. Later, I added a camera pointed toward the garage because the idea of anyone showing up unannounced made my stomach knot. I didn't know then what those cameras would end up meaning. I just knew I hated feeling exposed. Around that time, I met Rowan Pierce through a professional networking group. Not a dating app, not some dramatic setup. Just one of those conversations that starts about work and somehow turns into something human. Rowan lived out of state and we didn't jump into anything fast. What hit me was the opposite of pressure. Rowan didn't ask me to prove anything, didn't hint that love was earned through sacrifice, didn't treat my goals like they were a resource to be harvested. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe around someone. By the beginning of October, my savings number was close enough to my goal that I could taste it. I had a listing saved on my phone. A craftsman that made my chest tighten in a good way. Hardwood floors. A kitchen window that turned sunlight into something almost golden. 3 bedrooms, and a small porch that looked like it belonged in a movie where good things happen to people who try. That Saturday, I drove to Overland Park with a grin I couldn't fully hide. I was excited. I was proud. I was ready to finally share something good with the people who were supposed to care. I didn't know that by the time dessert hit the table, the dream I'd been building for years would be treated like a pile of cash sitting in the middle of the room, something my family had already decided how to spend. The house looked the same as always, trim lawn porch light on the faint smell of someone's dinner drifting into the driveway. But the second I walked in, I felt it. That tight electric feeling you get right before a storm breaks. Not loud, not obvious, just charged. My dad was in his chair, but he wasn't performing his usual routine. He didn't launch into complaints. He didn't meet my eyes for more than a second. It was like he was waiting for a cue. My mom moved too smoothly, too attentive, asking how work was going in that bright voice she used when she wanted something. She told me I looked healthy. She said she was proud of how disciplined I was. Those weren't her words, not normally. My mom didn't hand out praise unless she was building toward a favor. We sat down at the dining room table and everything was laid out like a normal suburban family meal. Plates, warm meatloaf on the platter, salad that nobody would eat, iced tea sweating on coasters. If someone had walked by the window, they would have seen a picture-perfect scene. Inside, it felt like a stage. Kendra and Dustin arrived late like they always did, except this time they didn't stumble in apologizing or making jokes. They walked in with purpose. Kendra had her laptop. Dustin carried a thick stack of printed pages, the kind with colored charts and bold headers. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so unsettling, like my sister thought she was about to pitch a room full of investors instead of eat dinner with family. They didn't ask me how I was. They didn't ask what I'd been working on, what I was excited about, anything that would have made me feel like a person. Kendra slid her laptop onto the table and started talking before we'd even finished our first few bites. She didn't ease into it. She didn't tell a story. She launched. "This is different," she said, eyes bright, voice clipped with that dangerous mix of confidence and desperation. She started clicking through slides, market size, projected revenue growth curves that bent upward like a promise. She talked about initial development and marketing runway and time to profitability. Dustin jumped in at the exact moments you'd expect, like he'd rehearsed his lines. "The opportunity won't wait," he said. We're at the perfect moment. It's now or never. I watched my parents while Kendra spoke, expecting skepticism, expecting at least a question. Instead, my mom nodded along. My dad sat still, jaw-tight, eyes on his plate. They weren't hearing this for the first time. That realization landed in my gut like a weight. This wasn't Kendra showing up with a spontaneous idea. This was a plan, a coordinated, pre-approved plan. And I was the missing piece they'd been waiting to plug in. Kendra's tone shifted from presentation to persuasion. "We've run the numbers," she said, tapping the printed graphs. "It's a solid return. 2 years, and we could double the investment." That's when they all looked at me. Not casually, not in passing, all at once. Like the spotlight swung and locked. I felt my mouth go dry. "Why are you all staring at me like that?" Kendra smiled, small and sweet, the same smile she used when we were kids, and she wanted me to take the blame for something she broke. "Well," she said, drawing the word out, "Mom mentioned you've been saving for a house." I didn't answer. I didn't want to. My mom kept her eyes on her napkin, smoothing it like it was suddenly fascinating. Kendra leaned in. "You've got, what was it? About 120,000 saved." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. The room went quiet in that specific way that tells you everyone already agreed on the next step. I stared at my mom. You told her that my mom didn't deny it. She just sighed like I was being difficult about something that was already settled. "We're family," she said, as if that explained why my private finances had become a group discussion. In that instant, I understood something ugly and clean. They hadn't been watching me build a future. They'd been watching me assemble a resource. Kendra slid one of the printed pages toward me like it was a contract. "This could be your investment," she said. "You'd be part of something big. And in 2 years, you'd have double. You could buy an even better house." I laughed one sharp breath that sounded wrong in my own ears because the audacity was almost surreal. My house money wasn't a casual gamble. It was my entire life plan. It was the reason I'd spent years eating like a broke college kid with a full-time job. It was why I'd watched friends go on weekend trips while I stayed home and worked. It was why I'd ridden the bus in winter when I could have financed a car. It was why I'd built that exit plan spreadsheet in the first place. "I'm not investing my house money," I said, steady but firm, "not in this." Kendra's face cracked instantly like a mask slipping. "You're not even going to consider it." "No," I said. "I'm not." Dustin's chair scraped. "Wow." He muttered loud enough for the table to hear. "That's cold." Kendra's eyes filled. "You don't understand how important this is. I understand exactly what it is," I said. "It's you asking me to gamble my future." And that's when the second twist hit, quiet but devastating. My dad finally spoke, voice rough. "We can't do this again," he said, and there was something raw under the words that didn't sound like anger. It sounded like fear. Again I repeated, even though I already knew. My mom's face tightened. Kendra looked away. Dustin stared at the table like he suddenly didn't want to be part of the moment. My dad exhaled through his nose. "The last 2 times. We had to remortgage," he admitted. "We took out loans. We covered things. We're not in a position to do it anymore." My stomach dropped. Not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed the shape of the trap. They weren't asking me to invest. They were asking me to take the weight they'd been carrying and make it mine. They were exhausted financially and emotionally, and they decided the safest exit was me. My mom's voice came out softer, scripted. "Sometimes family has to sacrifice," she said, like she'd practiced it in the mirror. "That's just what you do for each other." I looked at her and felt something inside me harden. Not hatred, not rage, just clarity. While Kendra sniffled and Dustin leaned in with that impatient energy, I noticed details I hadn't seen at first. Dustin kept asking questions that had nothing to do with Kendra's business and everything to do with my liquidity. "Are you planning to buy cash?" he said. "Or are you doing a mortgage?" He asked it like he was checking how quickly I could move money. "What's the timeline? How fast could you pull it if you needed to?" And Kendra's phone kept lighting up on the table, buzz after buzz after buzz. She would glance down, swallow, then looked back up with that bright, forced expression. It wasn't just nerves. It felt like pressure. Like someone outside that room was counting on her to come home with a yes. I pushed the printed graphs back toward her. "No," I said again. "I'm not doing this. Not with my house money." The temperature of the room changed. It was subtle at first, my mom's eyes narrowing, my dad's jaw tightening, Kendra's tears turning sharper, more performative. The presentation was over. The persuasion was over. And I could feel what was coming next, like hearing thunder roll before the rain hits. My sister wasn't going to stay in business pitch mode. My father wasn't going to stay quiet. And my mother was about to do what she always did when she didn't get her way. The dinner table wasn't a dinner table anymore. It was a courtroom. And I was the one on trial. The moment I pushed those glossy printouts back toward Kendra, the room stopped pretending. It wasn't a family dinner anymore. It was a hearing. The kind where the verdict is decided before you even sit down. Kendra's tears came fast, like she'd been waiting for her cue. She pressed a hand to her chest and stared at me like I'd just taken something from her. "You have to help," she said, voice shaking. "You're my brother. What are you even doing if you don't care about my future?" Dustin leaned back in his chair and let out a laugh that wasn't funny. "Unbelievable," he said. "You'd really watch your sister drown because you want a house." My dad still wouldn't look at me. His fork hovered over his plate like he'd forgotten how to eat. My mom's gaze kept darting between my face and Kendra's as if she was measuring how much pressure would break me. She reached for the role she knew best, the one that always worked in our family, moral authority. "Thayer," she said, soft and disappointed, like she was talking to a child who'd failed a test. "You've always been so capable, so responsible. That's why this is so hard to understand. Sometimes you have to sacrifice. That's what family does." I stared at her. I could hear the word family in her mouth the way you hear a slogan in a commercial. Polished, convenient, empty. Kendra's phone buzzed again. She glanced down quickly and flipped it face down, but not before I caught the edge of her panic. She was being pushed. Maybe by creditors, maybe by pride, maybe by whatever story she'd sold herself. But it didn't change what she was asking me to do. It just explained why she was frantic. "I'm not sacrificing my life to fund another one of your experiments," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You've done this twice. Twice. And both times it ended with Mom and Dad cleaning it up." Kendra's face twisted. "This time is different." Dustin leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You don't know that. I know your track record," I said. "And I know mine. Mine is that I've spent years living like I don't deserve comfort so I can afford one decent thing that's mine." My mom's eyes narrowed. "Don't exaggerate." "I'm not," I said. "I took the bus for 4 years. I skipped birthdays. I worked weekends while everyone else went out. I'm not handing that over because you printed some charts." Kendra sobbed louder, the kind of crying that demands an audience. "So you're just going to let me fail? You're going to let me lose everything?" "I'm not making you lose anything," I said. "Your choices are doing that." My dad finally lifted his head. His voice came out low and flat. "Enough. This isn't a debate." I felt my spine stiffen. "Then what is it?" He looked at me for the first time all night, and the way he looked wasn't father to son. It was owner to property that won't cooperate. "You're going to give Kendra that money," he said, each word deliberate, "or you're not part of this family anymore." The sentence landed so cleanly, it felt unreal. For a second, I actually waited for the punchline, for him to soften it, for my mom to jump in and say he didn't mean it like that. But my mom didn't move. She didn't gasp. She didn't reach for peace. She just sat there, lips pressed together, as if she'd already agreed to this exact line. Kendra stopped crying long enough to watch me. Dustin watched too, like he was waiting to see if the threat worked. My chest tightened, not because I was scared, but because something in me finally understood the structure of my family. Love wasn't unconditional. It was transactional. And the currency was whatever they could get out of me without calling it theft. "You can't be serious," I said. My dad's jaw clenched. "I'm dead serious." My mom added almost gently, "Don't make this harder than it has to be. That was the part that hurt the most. Not the threat. The calm. Like cutting me off was a management decision. I looked at all of them. My parents, who were supposed to protect me. My sister, who was supposed to see me as a person. Her husband, who was acting like my future was a pool of cash he could stick his hands into. And I realized the trap they'd built. If I gave in, I would be their solution forever. Every time Kendra fell, I'd be the net. Every time my parents got tired, I'd be the check. And if I ever said no again, they would use the same lever: guilt, shame, exile, until I broke. I pushed my chair back slowly. I'm not giving her my money. I said quiet enough that they had to lean in to hear it. Not now. Not ever. Kendra's face crumpled. Dustin cursed under his breath. My dad stood up so abruptly his chair scraped the floor. Then get out, he said. Get out of my house and don't come back. I waited for my mom to stop him. She didn't. She just watched me, eyes shiny, like she was the victim of my decision. I stood there for a second longer than I should have because some part of me still wanted a miracle. A moment where they remembered I was their son, their brother, not a financial plan. But no one moved toward me. No one apologized. No one even asked if I was okay. So I grabbed my jacket, my keys, and I walked out. On the way to the door, I felt my mom's eyes flick toward my phone like it was a reflex, like she was already thinking about how to reach me later if she needed to. Dustin muttered something about where you live and what you're sitting on, the kind of half-sentence that sounded like a warning wrapped in a joke. And Kendra watched me with a look that wasn't sadness. It was hunger, like I was something slipping out of her hands. I drove back to Kansas City with my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles went white. When I got to my studio, the parking lot lights poured into my window like they were mocking me. I sat on my bed and stared at the wall for a long time, replaying my father's words until they stopped sounding like a bad dream. The next morning, I changed my number. I blocked every email address I could think of. I cut off every route they'd ever used to pull me back in. Not out of spite, out of survival. And I told myself a rule I've never forgotten, since if they could cut me off over money once, the day they came back would be about money too. I went to work like nothing happened because that's what you do when you're trying not to fall apart. But under the routine, something new had formed, something hard and steady. A boundary. And I didn't fully understand it then, but that boundary was going to be the reason I lived through what came later. A year after that night, I bought the house. I still remember the first time I stood alone in the empty living room after closing. The air smelled like fresh paint and old wood. The floorboards made that soft creak that tells you a place has a history, but it isn't trying to swallow you. Sunlight came through the kitchen window in a clean sheet, like it was blessing the counters. I walked from room to room slowly, not because I was inspecting, but because I couldn't believe it was mine. 3 bedrooms. One became my office the next day. I set up my desk, mounted a second monitor, and for the first time I worked without my shoulders glued to my ears. Another bedroom stayed mostly empty, just a simple bed and a clean set of sheets for guests I wasn't sure I'd ever invite. The third became storage for all the things I'd postponed owning while I lived in that studio: a real dining table, a couch that didn't come from a friend's curb, a bookshelf that held more than just manuals and warranty papers. Peace, I learned, is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It just exists, and you realize you've been living without it your whole life. I didn't hear from my parents. Not once. No apology. No check-in. No message asking if I was alive. That silence could have made me sad, but after the first few months it started to feel like confirmation. Their love had conditions. I failed the test. They moved on. I moved on too in the only ways I knew how: structure, control-proof. I tightened my life like a sealed container. I changed where my mail went. I updated every account. I removed my parents as emergency contacts from anything that still had their names on it. I treated my privacy the way other people treat their valuables. I installed a doorbell camera first, then another camera angled toward the garage and driveway. Part of me told myself it was for package theft. Another part of me knew it was because I'd spent enough of my life being surprised by people who felt entitled to me. The cameras didn't make me paranoid. They made me calm. They meant if someone showed up, I'd know. If someone lied later, I'd have receipts. Work got better. I took on bigger projects, got promoted, started earning the kind of money that made my old spreadsheet look like a relic. I wasn't rich, but I was stable. I slept through the night. I cooked real meals. I stopped flinching when my phone rang. Every so often, my friend Shelby would give me updates I didn't ask for. Kendra's doing great, she told me at one point. Like actually great. New house, traveling all the time. It's all over her social media. I'd expected the news to sting. It didn't. If anything, it made me feel lighter. If Kendra was thriving, then I'd done the right thing by protecting myself. I could be glad for her from a distance without reopening the door that had almost closed on my fingers. But Shelby also mentioned things that didn't fit the highlight reel. She moves a lot, Shelby said once, like it was an offhand comment. Not like normal upgrades, like she's always switching neighborhoods. And she talks about investors like they're breathing down her neck, then she laughs it off like it's nothing. It stayed in my mind as background noise, a faint warning I didn't have context for. Kendra's life had always been chaotic. Moving didn't mean much. Complaining didn't mean much. She complained the way some people breathe. Still, there were moments when the past tapped on my shoulder. Once I got a notification from an old email account, I barely checked an alert that someone had tried to sign in. The location didn't match mine. I changed the password, turned on extra security, and told myself it was random, spam, a glitch, the internet being the internet. And then it stopped. No more alerts. No more weirdness. The quiet returned. That's how it always works. You relax just enough to believe the danger is gone. Around year 4, I met Rowan Pierce at a networking event that was supposed to be about career growth and turned into the first normal conversation I'd had in a long time. Rowan didn't live in Kansas or Missouri. Rowan lived out in North Carolina. We talked about work then, about family then, about the kind of life we wanted. Nothing dramatic. Nothing rushed. Just that rare feeling of being seen without being measured. We did the long-distance thing for a while. Calls after work. Visits when we could manage them. Rowan's presence didn't feel like pressure. It felt like a steady hand on my back when life got heavy. And slowly, the idea of moving stopped sounding like running away and started sounding like choosing something. By the time I hit year 5, I was thinking seriously about it. Selling my house, relocating to Raleigh, starting fresh with someone who didn't treat me like a tool. It was the kind of possibility I'd never let myself entertain when I was 26 and counting pennies in a studio lit by parking lot lamps. I was finally in a place where my past felt like it belonged to someone else. Then on an ordinary weekday, I checked that old email account out of habit more than anything. There weren't many messages, a few spam ads, a newsletter I forgot to unsubscribe from. And then I saw one name in the inbox that made my stomach drop so hard it felt like a physical punch. Maureen Rook. The subject line was short, urgent, the kind of words that bypass reason and go straight for the part of you that still wants your parents to be parents. I opened it, and the first sentence pulled me back toward Overland Park before I even finished reading. I stared at the email until the words blurred, then snapped back into focus like they were trying to grab me by the collar. It was from my mom, Maureen, sent to an old address I barely checked anymore. The subject line was short and urgent, the kind of thing that bypasses logic and goes straight to the part of you that's still 8 years old, still wired to come running when your mother sounds scared. This is life or death. Come home. Please. I reread it 3 times, trying to find any hint of what it actually meant. There was nothing. No details. No names. No explanation. Just that phrase, heavy and absolute. I hated how fast my mind went to worst-case scenarios. My dad collapsing in the kitchen. My mom with a diagnosis she didn't want to say out loud. A car accident. Something irreversible. And then another part of my brain spoke up colder and more practiced. They cut you off for 5 years. If this is truly life or death, why now, and why this email? I sat at my desk in Kansas City, the same desk I'd built my peace around, and felt my chest split into 2 competing instincts. One was duty, the old reflex that said they raised you, you can't ignore them if someone is dying. The other was memory, the sharp flash of my father standing up from that dining table and telling me to get out. I wrote back anyway. Short. Controlled. Saturday. Tell me what's going on. I tried to go back to work after that, but my hands kept hovering over the keyboard like they didn't trust the day anymore. Every few minutes I checked my phone. Nothing. No reply. Just silence, like they'd thrown the hook and didn't care if I swallowed it immediately or not. Saturday morning I drove out to Overland Park with my stomach tight and my jaw clenched. I told myself I was going for answers, not reconciliation. I told myself I could walk away the second I realized this was a play. Still, when I pulled into the familiar neighborhood, it hit me how small it all looked now. The same streets, the same tidy lawns, the same sense of appearances being everything. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, hands on the wheel, watching the front door like it might open and reveal a version of my parents I recognized. Then I saw the driveway. A Porsche. Low, glossy, expensive. And beside it a Mercedes that looked like it had never seen a speck of dust. My throat went dry. I hadn't even gotten out of the car and the picture was already wrong. If this was life or death, why did it look like a luxury car showroom I got out anyway? My mom opened the door before I could knock, like she'd been watching from behind the curtain. She looked older than I remembered. More lines around her mouth. Her hair a little thinner at the temples. For half a second I felt something soften in me. Then her eyes flicked past me down the driveway like she was checking whether I'd brought anyone with me. "Thayer," she said, voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. "Thank you for coming." Inside the living room was staged like a meeting. My dad Gordon was in his chair posture, rigid expression carved out of stone. Kendra sat on the couch with Dustin beside her, holding her hand like she might drift away if he let go. Kendra's eyes were red. Dustin looked tense, but not grief tense. More like cornered. I didn't sit. I stayed standing near the doorway where leaving would be easy. "What's going on?" I asked. "Your email said life or death." My mom's mouth tightened. She glanced at my dad, then at Kendra as if passing the speaking role. "It's about your sister," she said, and immediately her voice took on that careful, loaded tone she used when she wanted me to feel responsible. "She's in trouble." Kendra's chin wobbled. She looked at the carpet instead of at me. Dustin's hand tightened around hers. My dad cleared his throat like he was about to deliver a business report. "Her company went under," he said. 3 months ago." I blinked. Shelby's updates flashed through my head. The travel posts. The living the dream photos. The way Kendra always looked like she was winning. And now this. "The bank took the house," my dad continued. "They're staying wherever they can." I held my expression still. "I'm sorry," I said, "because losing your home is brutal no matter who you are. But what does that have to do with me?" That's when Kendra finally spoke, voice thin as paper. 150,000. The number hung in the air, too big to be casual and too specific to be an exaggeration. "Who do you owe $150,000 to?" I asked, eyes moving to Dustin because he looked like the one who actually understood the situation. "Private investors," he said quickly. "Not the kind you stall. Not the kind you negotiate with." Kendra started crying again. "They've been calling," she whispered. "They know where we're staying. They know our routines. They said we have until the end of the month." There it was. The deadline. The ticking clock they'd brought with them like a weapon. My mom stepped closer, hands clasped like she was praying. "We're scared," she said. "Really scared." I felt the pull of empathy, the human part of me that didn't like seeing people terrified. Then the other part, the one built from 5 years of silence, asked the question that mattered. "And you want what from me?" My mom didn't hesitate. "We know you bought a house," she said, like it was common knowledge, "a nice one, and we think you should sell it." For a moment I didn't breathe. Not because it surprised me, because a darker part of me had expected this the second I saw those cars, but because of how cleanly she said it. Like she was telling me to return a sweater she didn't like. "You're young," she added as if that made it reasonable. "You can start over. Your sister can't handle these people. She could get hurt." I laughed once, not kindly. "Are you serious right now?" My dad's face didn't change. "Family helps family," he said like he was reading a rule off a plaque. My eyes burned. "Family," I repeated. You told me I wasn't family anymore. You remember that part, right? 5 years ago, I walked out of this house, and none of you cared whether I lived or died. Kendra's crying turned desperate. That was different, she said, grabbing at the air like she could grab at time. This is dangerous. This isn't just business. They're not going to just sue me. Then go to the police, I said. My dad shook his head. You don't understand. I understand enough to see 2 luxury cars outside, I said, voice sharpening. Sell those. Dustin's face tightened. We need them for work. I stared at him. You need them more than you need to be safe, Kendra's head snapped up. Don't do that, she said, suddenly angry through the tears. Don't act like we're living some glamorous life. We've been trying to keep everything together. By keeping the expensive cars, I asked. By asking me to throw away the one stable thing I built. My mom stepped in front of me, eyes glossy. That house, she said, you could sell it, pay off her debt, and still have money left for an apartment. A nice apartment. A nice apartment. The same phrase they'd used years ago, like a cage dressed up as a compromise. I felt my throat tighten. Mom, I said I lived like a ghost to buy that house. I worked my ass off. I didn't take shortcuts. I didn't ask you for anything. And you cut me off anyway. My dad leaned forward, voice low and impatient. Stop bringing up the past. The past is the only reason we're standing here, I said. You don't get to erase it because it's inconvenient. My mom's expression shifted like she'd moved from pleading to planning. If something happens to your sister, she said softly, you'll live with that forever. There it was. The guilt knife, clean and practiced. I took a slow breath. And if I sell my house and ruin my future for her choices, I said I'll live with that forever too. My dad's eyes hardened. You're being selfish. No, I said. I'm being honest. She's a grown woman. If you want to save her, sell your house. My mom's mouth fell open. We can't. Then you finally understand how I feel, I said. Kendra stood up, shaking. You're supposed to care, she snapped. You're supposed to help me. Where was that care when you all told me to get out? I asked. Where was that loyalty when I was alone? You don't get to weaponize family only when you need cash. Dustin pointed at me like I was the criminal. You're making a mistake, he said. My dad stood too, and for a second I saw the old power in his posture, the assumption that he could still command me. If you walk out that door again, he said, don't expect. I cut him off because I couldn't listen to that speech twice in one lifetime. I'm not selling my house, I said, clear and final. This is not my debt. This is not my emergency. Figure it out. My mom's voice broke. Thayer. No, I said, and stepped backward toward the door. You don't get to come back after 5 years and demand I destroy myself for you. I left without hugging anyone, without promising anything. I drove back to Kansas City with my heart pounding, not from guilt, but from something colder. Because as I replayed my dad's face in my mind, I realized he wasn't just angry, he was calculating. When I got home, I blocked my mom's email address. I sat in my quiet kitchen, the one with the morning light, and tried to convince myself it was over. Then my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was short. No greeting. No name. We're not done. The next few days felt like waiting for a storm you can smell in the air but can't see on the radar. I went to work, answered emails, sat through meetings, pretended my life was still normal. But every time a car door slammed outside, my body reacted like it was a threat. I started checking my cameras more than usual, not obsessively, just often enough to admit I didn't feel as safe as I wanted to. On Tuesday morning, I was in my kitchen making coffee, watching steam rise and trying to convince myself the tightness in my chest would fade. My laptop was open on the counter, my workday already queued up. The house was quiet. Then I heard a car pull up, fast tires crunching gravel at the edge of my driveway. A door slammed, heavy footsteps. I froze, mug halfway to my mouth. When I looked at the camera feed, my stomach dropped. My parents were walking up my driveway like they belonged there. My mom in her coat face, set with purpose. My dad beside her scanning my house like it was inventory. I didn't open the door right away. I watched them through the screen, my hand hovering over my phone. My mom rang the doorbell. The chime echoed through my living room like a warning. I opened the door enough to be heard, not enough to invite them in. "What are you doing here?" I said. "How did you get my address?" My mom's eyes flicked past me into my house, hungry and curious. "We had to," she said, voice soft, like she was asking for sugar, not trespassing. My dad didn't bother with softness. "Nice place," he said, and his gaze moved over my living room, the windows, the layout. He was measuring distance exits value. It made my skin crawl. "Answer my question," I said. My mom hesitated just long enough to tell on herself. "Kendra hired someone," she said. "A private investigator." The words hit like ice water. "You paid someone to find me." She was desperate, my mom said quickly, like desperation made stalking acceptable. My dad stepped closer. "We're here to talk." "We already talked," I said. "You need to leave." My mom put a hand on the door and pushed. I tried to hold it, but she leaned in with the stubborn force I remembered from childhood when she decided a boundary didn't apply to her. The door swung wider, and suddenly she was inside my entryway, looking around like she was touring a model home. "Don't," I said sharply. "Get out." My dad followed her in as if the house was family property. He walked 2 steps into my living room and turned palms open like he was presenting the obvious. "It's just you here," he said. "All this space. You don't need it." I felt heat rise behind my eyes. "You don't get to decide what I need," I said. "Both of you leave. Right now." My mom's voice shifted into that practiced tremble. "Your sister is scared," she said. "They called again. They said end of the month." "There's that deadline again," I said. "Call the police." My dad scoffed. "The police can't fix this." "What the police can fix," I said, pulling out my phone, "is 2 people trespassing in my house." My dad's hand moved fast. He grabbed my wrist in a quick, sharp motion, not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to remind me he could. "Don't be ridiculous," he snapped. My whole body went still. Then I yanked my arm back and stepped away, putting distance between us. "Don't touch me," I said, voice low. "Do it again, and you'll be the one explaining bruises to an officer." My mom's eyes widened, then narrowed. "You'd really call the cops on your own parents? You're really here uninvited in my home," I said. "Yes, I would." My dad's face tightened, and I could see the moment his anger crossed into something uglier. "Don't make us do this the hard way," he said, words clipped. My stomach turned. "The hard way," I repeated. My mom's mouth pinched. "You're going to regret this," she said like a curse. And then my dad did something that confirmed what I'd been feeling since Overland Park. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at my house. At the big front windows, the glass, the door frame, the route to the garage. His eyes kept tracing the structure like he was memorizing it. Not to admire, to map. In that moment, my fear stopped being abstract. "You came here to intimidate me," I said. "You're not here to talk." My mom's voice sharpened. "We're here to save your sister. You're here to take my life apart so she doesn't have to face hers," I said. "And it's not happening." I held up my phone so they could see the screen. "I'm calling 911, I said. "You have 10 seconds to walk out on your own." My dad opened his mouth like he was going to argue, but my tone must have cut through something because he hesitated. My mom looked at him, and for the first time I saw a flicker of uncertainty. Not remorse. Calculation. They backed toward the door, my mom still crying, still trying to keep the emotional grip even as she retreated. "If something happens to Kendra," she whispered, "that's on you." I stepped forward and held the door open. "And if something happens to me because you refuse to respect a boundary," I said, "that's on you." My dad paused on the threshold and pointed at me. "You think you're better than us," he said. "No," I said. "I think I'm done being used." When the door closed behind them, my hands started shaking. Not because I doubted myself, because I finally understood what I was dealing with. They weren't going to stop at guilt. They'd already crossed into trespassing, grabbing threats that sounded like warning labels. I pulled up my camera recordings and saved them in 3 places. I made notes with dates and times like I was building a case file. Then I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the wall, listening to the quiet, trying to slow my breathing. I called Rowan that night and told him everything. Not dramatized, not softened. Just the facts. They found my address, they walked in, my dad grabbed my wrist, they threatened me, they looked at my house like it was a target. Rowan didn't interrupt. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. Thayer. He said, "That's not normal. That's not a family argument. That's escalation." "I know," I said. "What do you want to do?" I looked around my house at the furniture I'd bought with careful money, at the windows my dad's eyes had traced, at the front door my mom had pushed past. "I don't want them to have anything to hold over me," I said. "Not the house, not an address, not a place they can show up and turn into a scene." The next morning I called Miles Keene, the realtor whose card had been sitting in my drawer for months from a conversation I once had about moving someday. My voice was calm, but my hands were still cold. "Miles," I said, "it's Thayer Rook. I need to sell my house. Fast." He asked why, and I didn't give him the whole story. I didn't have to. "Safety," I said. "And I'm willing to price it to move." There was a pause on the line. Then he said, "I can work with that." When I hung up, I felt sick, like I'd just admitted my home wasn't invincible. But beneath the nausea was something else: relief. Because choosing to sell wasn't surrender. It was strategy. It was me taking away their leverage before they could use it again. That night, I walked through each room and tried to imprint it into my memory. The morning light in the kitchen, the quiet hum of the fridge, the way the hardwood felt under my feet. I locked the doors, checked the cameras, and still I didn't feel safe. I was standing in the living room, staring at the front window my dad had studied, when my phone buzzed again with an unknown number. The message was even shorter than the last one. "You can't hide from us." I stood there in the glow of my own lamps in the home I'd built as my escape plan made real, and realized the truth that made my throat tighten. I had locked the doors. But I wasn't sure locks meant anything to people who believed they owned you. A month after I listed my house, the place already felt like it belonged to someone else. Miles moved fast, exactly like he said he would. Showings happened while I was still trying to keep my hands steady at work. The offer came in lower than I would have wanted in a calm world, but I wasn't living in a calm world anymore. I accepted it anyway, signed what I needed to sign, and told myself I wasn't losing anything. I was removing leverage. I was pulling the last loose thread my parents could grab and yank. Closing happened so quickly it was almost disorienting. One week my keys were in my pocket, the next they were in an envelope sliding across a desk, and my name was no longer tied to that address. I packed in a way that didn't feel like moving. It felt like evacuating. Rowan drove out to Kansas City to help, and the simple fact of having someone beside me while I taped boxes shut made me realize how long I'd been doing everything alone. The morning we loaded the last box, I stood in the doorway of the craftsman I'd worked years to earn, and I let myself feel it for one clean second, the light, the quiet, the safety I thought I'd bought. Then I shut the door and didn't look back. Raleigh wasn't a magical reset, but it was different. The air was warmer. The trees looked softer. Rowan's place felt lived in a way that didn't make me tense. Within a few days, my body stopped bracing every time a car slowed outside. I worked remotely from Rowan's guest room, and at night we'd sit with laptops open, scrolling through listings, talking about neighborhoods, joking about paint colors like normal people. I kept my Kansas City number, but I tightened everything else. I stopped checking that old email. I told myself there was nothing left for my parents to chase. No address, no house to point at, no front window for my dad to study like a target. For the first time in weeks, I believed I'd outrun them. It was a Tuesday morning when the illusion shattered. Rowan had already left for an appointment, and I was in the kitchen rinsing my coffee mug, half listening to a conference call through one earbud. My phone buzzed with an unknown number from a Missouri area code. I ignored it. It buzzed again, then again. The kind of repetition that turns your stomach before you even know why. I stepped away from the sink and answered on the fourth call, mostly out of instinct. Mostly because the part of me that grew up under my mother's urgency still had a reflex for emergencies. "Hello," a man's voice, professional and flat. Is this Thayer Rook? My spine went rigid. Yes. Who is this? This is Officer Delgado with the Kansas City Police Department. I'm calling about an incident involving Gordon and Maureen Rook. The world narrowed to that sentence. My throat went dry. What kind of incident? They were arrested last night, he said. Breaking and entering. Property destruction. For a second, I couldn't make the words connect. Where the address listed is 1627 Brookview Terrace, he said, and my stomach dropped so hard it felt like I missed a step. That was my old address, my former house, the place I'd sold, the place I'd left behind like a sealed chapter. I sold that house, I said immediately. I don't live there. I don't own it. There was a pause. Paper shuffling, keyboard clicks, the sound of someone confirming details he already suspected. That matches what we're seeing, Officer Delgado said. The current owner is Elliot Granger. He came home and found your parents inside his residence. I grabbed the edge of the counter so I wouldn't sit down on the floor. Inside, I repeated, doing what Officer Delgado's voice stayed controlled, but the details were brutal. They caused extensive damage to the living room, windows broken, furniture destroyed, TV smashed, coffee table destroyed. There was spray paint on the walls. They were using baseball bats. My head pulsed. I pictured my father's hands, my mother's face. I pictured the way my dad had looked through my front window like he was memorizing weak points. I pictured that message on my phone. You can't hide from us. The threat wasn't metaphor. It had been a plan. Elliot Granger called 911. Officer Delgado continued. He said he heard glass break from the driveway, then saw movement inside. When officers arrived, your parents were still in the living room. They claimed they were retaliating against you. My stomach turned. Retaliating, I said like the word tasted bitter. They thought it was still my house. That's what they stated, Officer Delgado said. They said you abandoned them. That you owed them. They said they were sending a message. I pressed my eyes shut. Somewhere in Kansas City, an innocent man's home had become the battleground for my family's rage. And my parents had done it with the confidence of people who believed they were justified. Officer Delgado lowered his voice slightly. They asked to contact you. Of course they did. Do you want to speak with them? He asked. My heart pounded, but my voice came out steadier than I expected. If you put them on, I'll listen. But I'm not agreeing to anything. There was a muffled sound, then voices in the background. My mother's voice burst through, first raw and frantic. Thayer, oh my God, thank God you answered. I heard my dad behind her, louder than he needed to be. Tell them it's your house, he barked. Tell them we had a right to be there. My mother started crying. Please, she begged, words spilling over each other. This is a misunderstanding. They're treating it like a crime. Tell them it was yours. Tell them it was family business. I felt something in me go cold, not with hatred, but with clarity. Even now, even with handcuffs and sirens and a stranger's broken windows, they weren't sorry. They weren't horrified by what they'd done. They were trying to recruit me into the lie so the consequences wouldn't land on them. It wasn't my house, I said, firm. I sold it. My dad's voice cut in sharp and furious. Why would you do that? Why would you sell it without telling us? I almost laughed, but it wouldn't have been humor. It would have been disbelief. Because you showed up at my home, I said, and you grabbed me when I tried to call the police. Because you threatened me. Because you told me I couldn't hide from you. My mother sobbed harder. That doesn't matter right now. Thayer, listen to me. We need you. They're going to charge us. They're saying there's $40,000 in damage. We can't pay that. There it was. The shift. The old pattern, wearing a new outfit. First it was Kendra's debt. Now it was their arrest. The target changed, but the demand stayed the same. Thayer, fix it. Thayer, pay. Thayer, take the hit so we don't have to. I'm not lying for you, I said. And I'm not paying for what you did. My dad shouted something that sounded like my name turned into an insult. My mother kept pleading, her voice high and shaking. If you don't help us, they'll ruin our lives. Please. Please just tell them we thought it was your house. Tell them it was an accident. Tell them you'll cover it. We're your parents. I swallowed, forcing myself to breathe. You cut me off, I said quietly. You told me I wasn't family. You can't pick me up and put me down like a tool whenever you're in trouble. She inhaled sharply like she was about to launch into guilt again, but I didn't give her space. Officer Delgado, I said, raising my voice so he could hear me. I want to be clear. That property is not mine. I sold it. I live out of state now. I did not ask them to go there. I did not give them permission to enter. They came to my house weeks ago uninvited and refused to leave until I threatened to call police. My father grabbed my wrist when I tried to dial. They made statements that sounded like threats. I have camera footage. The line went quiet on their end for a beat. Then Officer Delgado's voice returned calm but sharper now. Understood, Mr. Rook. Thank you. My mother's voice surged again, desperate. Thayer, don't do this, don't bury us, please, I'm not burying you, I said, and my voice broke just slightly on the truth of it. You did this. You chose this. My dad yelled, You owe us, and I felt my jaw clench until it hurt. I don't, I said. Not anymore. I ended the call while my mother was still crying and my father was still shouting, and the silence afterward was so loud it rang in my ears. I stood in Rowan's kitchen staring at the wall like it might explain how two people could raise a child and still end up swinging bats through a stranger's living room because their child wouldn't finance their favorite daughter's mess. My hands shook as I set the phone down. Then my mind jumped to Elliot Granger, to the sound he must have heard to the moment he realized someone was inside his home. My parents could have been shot. Elliot could have been hurt. A situation that never should have existed had become dangerous because my family couldn't accept a boundary. When Rowan came home, he found me sitting at the table phone, face down, my coffee untouched. I told him everything in a rush that didn't feel like speaking so much as emptying poison. Rowan listened without interrupting. When I finished, he reached across the table and took my hand, grounding me with one simple squeeze. They finally showed you who they are, he said softly. I stared at our joined hands. They've been showing me, I said. I just didn't want to believe they'd go that far. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw bats swinging glass, exploding the innocent shock of a homeowner stepping into chaos, and my mother's voice begging me to rewrite reality so she wouldn't have to face what she'd done. I knew it wasn't over. There would be charges, court dates, restitution, and a story behind Kendra's so-called dangerous investors that suddenly felt less like truth and more like another lever. And for the first time, I wasn't just afraid of what my parents might do. I was afraid of what they had already proven they were willing to do when control slipped out of their hands. The aftermath didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces like debris floating back after an explosion. Officer Delgado called again 2 days later to confirm he'd received my email with timestamps from my cameras and notes from the day my parents showed up at my Kansas City house. He didn't ask me to fly back. He didn't push me to testify immediately. He just told me the facts in a voice that sounded like he'd heard versions of this before, but not often. They're facing serious charges, he said. Breaking and entering. Criminal damage to property. Depending on how the prosecutor files it, it could get heavier. The homeowner is pressing for restitution. I thought about Elliot Granger again. About walking into your own living room and finding strangers swinging bats like the place belonged to their anger. I didn't blame him for wanting consequences. I would have wanted them too. How much damage, I asked, even though I already knew. Initial estimate is around $40,000, Officer Delgado said. Could go up depending on additional repairs. I hung up and sat with the number in my lap like it was a brick. 40,000. A stranger's safety shattered. A stranger's home violated. And my parents had done it to punish me for not handing over money they believed they were entitled to. Shelby called a week later with the kind of hesitant tone people use when they're delivering news they didn't ask to carry. Thayer, she said, I heard what happened. Everyone here is talking about it. I'm sure they are, I said, voice flat. She exhaled. They're telling people you ruined them. I didn't respond. I could picture my mother's version of events already. I could hear my father's certainty. In their world, consequences were always something someone else did to them, never something they earned. Shelby continued. Your parents got a lawyer. They're trying to work out a deal. They don't want jail time. Of course they don't, I said. What's crazy, Shelby added carefully, is the money. They can't cover it. Between the damage and legal fees and court costs, it's a lot. I stared out the window at Raleigh's trees, the normal world continuing like my family wasn't detonating itself in another state. So what are they going to do? I asked, even though I could guess. Shelby hesitated. They might have to sell their house. The irony hit so hard, it made me laugh once sharp and bitter. The house my mother had called untouchable because they were older. The house my father said they couldn't risk. The house they insisted was the only safe asset they had. That house. A few weeks after that, Shelby called again, her voice lower. It happened, she said. They sold it. I closed my eyes and let the moment land. My parents had demanded I sell my home to save Kendra. When I refused, they invaded a stranger's home and caused so much damage they were forced to sell their own. It was like the universe had taken their ultimatum and turned it back on them, but nothing about it felt satisfying. It just felt sad and dangerous and inevitable. And get this, Shelby said like she didn't even want to say it out loud. After they paid what they owed for court and restitution and everything, they gave the rest to Kendra. I didn't speak for a long second. My parents had done it. They had done exactly what they demanded from me. They had cashed out their own stability to feed the same problem they'd been feeding for years. What about the investors, I asked finally. The people Kendra said were going to hurt her. Shelby exhaled like she'd been waiting for that question. That's the other thing, she said. They weren't what she made them sound like. They're not some scary underground crew. It's a legitimate investment group. They were threatening to sue. That's it. Lawsuit threats, not physical threats. Kendra exaggerated. A lot. My stomach tightened. The end-of-month deadline. The language about being watched. The way my mother had looked at me like I'd be responsible if something happened. The fear they used as a club. So she lied, I said. She played it up, Shelby said. And Dustin made it worse. He kept telling your parents it was life or death, that they had to get the money now. He's been stirring everything. I pictured Dustin at that dinner table 5 years earlier talking about urgency, about windows of opportunity, about how money had to move now. He'd always been good at pushing people into corners. And my parents, who loved control more than truth, had let him steer them because it served what they wanted, someone else's money. How are they living now? I asked. Shelby's voice turned tired. They're in an apartment, with Kendra and Dustin, all of them. It's not going well. Lots of fighting. Your mom blames your dad. Your dad blames Kendra. Kendra blames everyone. Dustin acts like he's the victim. It's a mess. I thanked Shelby and ended the call, then sat very still. The old part of me that had once believed family loyalty meant you absorb other people's damage tried to rise up, tried to whisper that maybe I should check in. Maybe I should soften. Maybe I should offer something small. Then I remembered my dad's hand on my wrist. I remembered my mom pushing into my house like my front door was hers. I remembered my father's voice telling me to lie to the police to claim ownership of a house that belonged to an innocent man, to take responsibility so he wouldn't have to. That wasn't love. That was a demand for sacrifice without consent. My parents tried to reach me through other people after that. Shelby told me my mom wanted to apologize. A cousin I barely spoke to sent a message that said they just want to talk. Another acquaintance from Overland Park wrote they're devastated. It would mean a lot if you called. Every message sounded the same, like someone had handed them a script. Not once did anyone say they're worried about you. Not once did anyone ask if I felt safe. The requests were always angled toward easing their discomfort, smoothing their mess, making consequences feel less sharp. Rowan watched me read the messages and delete them. He didn't tell me what to do. He didn't pressure me toward forgiveness or revenge. He just stayed close, like he was quietly holding the line with me. One night, after I'd spent an hour staring at my phone and then setting it face down like it burned, Rowan sat beside me on the couch and said, "You're allowed to protect your peace, even if they don't understand it." I nodded, and for the first time since Officer Delgado called, my chest loosened. Months passed. The court process moved forward without me being pulled back into Kansas City. The restitution was handled through what my parents paid and what they could negotiate. The story in my hometown kept mutating, but the truth stayed the truth. My parents broke into a home that wasn't theirs and destroyed it because they believed violence could force obedience. Kendra built a crisis out of her own choices and inflated fear to squeeze money out of people. Dustin poured gasoline on every conflict because it got him closer to someone else paying his bills. And me, I stopped letting their chaos define my calendar. Rowan and I kept looking at houses in Raleigh. Slowly, the idea of home stopped feeling like a vulnerability and started feeling like a shared decision. When we finally found one we loved, we walked through it together, and I noticed something I hadn't expected. I wasn't scanning for threats. I wasn't mapping exits. I was imagining mornings. A kitchen where coffee meant comfort. A room that could become an office without feeling like a bunker. A backyard where the air didn't smell like fear. When the dust settles, what lingers isn't the broken furniture or the shouting, it's the quiet realization that some people will call it family while they're asking you to bleed for their comfort. And when a line is finally drawn, it can feel lonely, even when it's necessary. Still, there's something deeply human in choosing to protect your peace without turning your heart to stone. If this story stayed with you, you're not alone. We all reach moments where love and boundaries have to share the same room, where dignity matters as much as forgiveness. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for ourselves and for others is to stop rescuing and start telling the truth gently and clearly. Thanks for spending this time with me. If you'd like to be part of this little corner where we listen and share without judgment, you can subscribe and come back for the next story. And if you want to drop a few lines in the comments where you're watching from or what this brought up for you. Until next time, take care and I'll see you soon.